Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 8 of Back2Basics on the Business Edge, brought to you by Feliciano School of Business at Montclair State University. I am Moe ElHussini, and here at Back2Basics, myself and Professor Elias discuss questions and issues facing business practitioners. Today's episode, which is episode 8, focuses on a really interesting topic that I think we can all relate to, which is managing difficult conversations, getting through difficult conversations and navigating through them. So, George, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Doing great, Mo. How have you been this week?
All good, all good. Nice and easy, relaxing weekend, enjoying the weather. How's your work and life been treating you last week?
Well, as you know, I just got back from Poland, so
yeah, how was that? We didn't get to talk about it.
Well, Poland was mostly I stayed in Warsaw. It was much nicer and much different than I expected. Very multicultural metropolitan city. Really had a great time. Relatively inexpensive compared to the New York City area. And wish I could have spent more time there. Wonderful parks, beautiful.
I love the pictures you sent me. The pictures were great. I got a little jealous from the food menus you had for dinner, but yeah, I'm glad you had a good time, and welcome back, man. Welcome back. I know we got a nice surprise for the audience today. We have a guest joining us. Do you want to take over, George, and do the introduction?
So yeah, really excited to have a guest here. It's our first time on the podcast. So we have Gail here. She's the expert in communications here at Montclair State University. She teaches here. She's founder of Quanta Communications. It's a consulting company that helps out with marketing, and she does organizational productivity support to small businesses and individual. Gail, you don't look it, but it looks like you have more than 25 years of experience in marketing, corporate communications, and event marketing. Fortune 500 companies, really just an amazing resume over here. And I can go on with all the sorts of stuff we've done with career communications, personal branding, presentation skills, networking, business writing. You also have an MBA in international business and a doctorate. You're working on your doctorate in marketing with a focus on consumer behavior. And something I know I have written here, but I heard you might be a third Dan in Taekwondo. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. Yes, I have a third degree black belt in Taekwondo. Yep.
You played that too, George, didn't you?
No, I did. I've done other martial arts, but I'm definitely not going to mess with Gail.
Yeah, I'm only a green belt, so you're way above me. But just also on a personal note from my end, Gail's office is right down the corridor from mine, and I always hear the conversations she has with the students, and they always go to her for many issues related to dialogue and conversation, verbally or in writing. So I am really glad to have you with us, Gail.
Thank you.
I want to give it to you if you have anything you wanted to add, Gail, or anything you wanted to
I just
mention.
want to thank you so much for having me here today, George and Mo. I'm really excited to talk about difficult conversations because so many people, we all have to have them at work, and many people avoid them, and avoiding them just really leads to disaster. So I'm hopeful today that we can talk a little bit about how to have them with greater confidence and ease for better business outcomes and better interpersonal outcomes.
Agreed. Well said, Gail. And that's kind of like how I want us to start it. And you said it exactly the way I was thinking about it. Conversations are difficult because besides what we're saying, that there's a lot more than the words that are exchanged that go into the conversation. So we know that they happen no matter what, and that no matter where you work, who you're working with, conversations come up because that's how we converse and how we relay any information. So why don't you start, Gail? Tell us, what are your thoughts around this topic?
Yeah, there was a study done in 2019, interesting study, and it said that 80% of those who participated in the study said they were avoiding having a difficult conversation at work, avoiding it altogether. And that's a lot of conversations not being had in the workplace, which you can imagine can cause many issues for the team, for the organization, and for the people working together. And why do people avoid it? They avoid it because it's uncomfortable, and people in the study, they said they're just not confident enough to have it. So how do you get confident having these conversations? You know, author Simon Sinek, he wrote Leaders Eat Last and the book Start With Why. He says that if you don't understand people, you don't understand business. So I would add to that, if you don't understand people, you're not going to be able to have successful, difficult conversations. So what do I mean by successful, difficult conversations? It's not the conversation where you get your way every time or you feel phenomenal when you're done. It's a conversation where all the people involved feel like that they've been heard, that they've been treated fairly, and that everyone in the conversation can understand the perspectives of others. They may not agree with everybody, but they can understand where people are coming from. And if you can do that, that conversation, regardless of what the outcome is for the people involved or the business, if you can do that, then people will feel better about having had the conversation. You will too, because at the end of the day, you want to build up your confidence and not avoid these conversations, because that's just 80% of people avoid them. I find that that's an astounding statistic.
That's amazing. I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
That is a huge statistic. And I wanted to ask you, in your own expert opinion, through your consulting and interactions, the difficult part for people, is it that the topic itself is difficult for them and they don't know how to relay it, or that the topic they know it inside out and the difficulty is in interacting, you know, with the listener, with the audience? Or is it a mix of both? Like, which one is it, do you think, that comes up more as the reason for the difficulty, the root of the difficulty?
I think people just don't want to upset people. We have an aversion to making people feel uncomfortable or not happy. We don't like when people around us are not happy, most of us. So when we have to have these conversations, we worry. It's unpredictable, right? You don't know how emotional the other person's going to get, how you might react to the other person. And of course, it depends on the relationship you have with the other person, how well you know them. But you might worry about the outcome for your relationship or for the company, depending on the topic. So people they try to avoid it. And we're going to go through some points here where when they do have it, they're not being direct for fear of being unkind. And we'll talk a little bit about that. Or they dance around the words they use, you know, and then the other person misunderstands them. So people avoid them because they fear the outcome. But I think that if you flip the script on that, and I love this phrase from the late Dr. Wayne Dyer, this quote that says, change the way you look at things and the things you look at change. So if you flip the script and change your perspective of how you feel about the conversation, you'll have a better outcome. If you enter every difficult conversation with the idea that you have something to learn about the other person, about yourself, then you will feel more comfortable starting that conversation. So change that mindset in your head that it's not going to be terrible, that I'm going to do this and I might be in a better place later on, at least with the relationship or with the topic, or at least understanding how I dealt with it.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. So that, in other words, you're not just listening for the sake of waiting for the person to finish so that you continue, but you actually listen for this, to listen, like you're paying attention to what is being said.
Oh yeah, and that's the first topic I wanted to talk about, is how do you ensure people feel that they've been heard? You have to listen. And it's interesting when we talk about business communications in general, there's hearing, right? We hear what someone says, but we have to listen to them. And that's an active process, active listening. It's not easy because we have to put away everything that's distracting us. And how about this? When I'm prepared to go into this conversation and I'm nervous, my mind's thinking a mile a minute. And I have maybe practiced some points that I have to say to you. And I'm not even listening to what you're saying because I'm thinking about all the points that I'm prepared to say. Well, that's a problem, because what if you go in that conversation, again, you have to think about what you might learn, and someone says something you had no idea why they were upset. You had no idea their perspective. So that's why you have to really force yourself to truly listen, put aside the distractions in your head. And you might hear something that might, you might be able to then respond to in a way that's empathetic. So there's empathetic listening as well. So what's that? That is listening to someone and trying to understand why they feel like they feel. So putting yourself in their shoes, right? And it's trying to understand their perspective. So if you can do that, you'll have a better understanding about where they're coming from, and then you'll be able to respond. So in a role-playing scenario, Mo, if you came to me and you said, we were having this conversation, we're coming together to have a difficult conversation because you're upset. And you say to me, Gail, I was really upset when you did this, or when you didn't come to the meeting with our clients, you left me by myself. My job, because maybe I didn't know why you were upset, to say, oh, Mo, I'm sorry. So when you were there by yourself, did you feel vulnerable? Is that what you're saying? Paraphrase. What are you saying? Am I hearing correctly? So when I say back to you, is that how you felt? And you said, yeah, I felt like you left me out there in the cold. Oh, then I would say something like, Mo, I'm so sorry. That was not my intent at all. You know, the reason I didn't come to the meeting is I believe. Now, in that scenario, I should have communicated that beforehand, and we might not have been having that difficult conversation then, because you would have known why I left you to go to that meeting by yourself. So it's me sitting there and hearing what you're saying, and then coming back to you and saying, so, oh, I'm hearing you say this. Is this what you mean? And for you to say, yes, that's what I mean, because you don't want to misunderstand what's happening while you're having a difficult conversation, right? So it's making sure that you're clear, I'm clear on what you're saying to me.
And Gail, let's actually dive into this a little more and take it one step further. Let's say, okay, you asked me, Mo, why were you upset? And I am talking because it's an emotional moment, right? And I'm getting the opportunity to express myself. So I'm actually talking for 4 minutes and you don't want to interrupt me. Let's go back to the main point that you said. How do you ensure people feel you've been heard? So let's say we're having this conversation, Mo, what's wrong? And I tell you, frankly, Gail, I'm upset because, and I'm talking for 4 minutes. What are the verbal, visual cues that you can give, body language, comments, that you can give to the person that is speaking to let them know that they are being listened to? You know what I mean? Because sometimes people, when you're looking at them, they can feel like you're disconnected and they actually get more defensive and they get more upset while they're expressing themselves. So what do you think, like, besides, nodding, repeating something they said, to show confirmation, what do you think are some of the things that come through your mind if I'm having that conversation with you to show that you are listening?
Well, here's what I'd say. Go into that conversation and put your phone away. Do not have that phone even on the table, because with that phone right next to you on the table, if a text comes in or something comes in, you're apt to look at it. The minute you glance at that phone, you are not with that person and in that conversation, because something else is more important at that moment. So don't have your phone with you at all. And then when you're listening to the person, look in their eyes. And yes, naturally, if you're doing that, you're probably going to nod as you understand, but watch their body language, not just their words. Because don't forget, the other person is uncomfortable too, right? They're having a hard time coming to the table. So they might be saying some words and maybe they're not being precise because they're a little dancing around their own topic. So what's their face saying? That's the emotional intelligence that we need to have. Are they not looking at us directly? If someone's not looking at you directly, they're uncomfortable. They don't want to lock eyes with you. How is their speech pattern? I get very excited. I talk really fast and talk about listening. So if you're going on for 4 minutes, I have to make sure that I don't cut you off. If this conversation is really important, I have carved out enough time that I'm not leaving until we've resolved something. So we're not on a time clock here. I will let you go until you get it all off your chest. And then when you're done, now the whole time I am listening and I'm making note of some key words you're saying. So then I can come back, like I said before, and say, so Mo, based on what you just said, here's what I'm hearing. And then paraphrase that. And then you may say, well, no, that's not what I meant. Or you may say, yes, that's exactly how I feel. And when you say that's exactly how I feel, I just made sure that you were heard. I just allow you 4 minutes to talk to me, to get everything off your chest. And I bet you feel a little bit better. and more relieved now than you did before you walked into the office.
George,
So,
what do
Gail,
you think
something that
about
you
this?
said that so Gail, something that you said that I really, really liked, and you started out with Simon Sinek, so I'm a big fan of his, and going, leaders eat last, really made me feel as though kind of kicking it off with a relationship and having a caring stance, making sure the people that you supervise or you lead have what they need, and that's what it's really all about.
Yeah.
And that kind of flows into how do you ensure people feel they have been heard. One of the things you're talking about is active listening and reflecting back, the words that they're saying. But you use a word, empathy and empathetic. And I think so many people misunderstand empathy for sympathy.
Yes.
So people aren't looking for you to feel sorry for them.
Mhm.
They, getting down on their level and actually feeling the way that other person feels is what helps you build rapport and trust, and really helps you have a really great conversation. So I really like those points you made.
Absolutely. That empathetic listening is so important, because you're not going to understand where someone's coming from unless you understand their feelings at the moment, how they reflect on whatever happened. You may have a different perspective. So it's really putting yourself in the other person's shoes, as opposed to, like you said, feeling sorry for them. That's totally not what empathetic listening is about, right? And so it's really trying to understand that perspective and how they feel. Once you understand how someone feels, then you could get back to basics. I'll bring that phrase in. You can get back to basics, which is how are you going to move forward then? So you really can't start moving forward in the conversation, whatever goal it is that you need to achieve, until you really hear each other and where each other's coming from.
Gail, how different is it if it was in writing? I mean, since we're talking about conversation, I know like one of the things I always remember is to try to avoid criticizing anyone in writing or writing anything negative, because I feel like it's there forever and they can keep opening it and reading it and remembering it,
Mhm.
versus a compliment, right?
Yeah.
So I try to keep things that are geared towards criticism verbally, so that, you know what, they're said, they're done, they're forgotten in a couple of days, hopefully. But how do you think this applies to somebody that's sending an email or sending something in writing?
So here is what I would say to anyone listening. If you need to have a difficult conversation, you have to have that conversation in the richest medium. And what I mean by that is in person, where you can see the person's face and their nonverbal, as well as what they're saying. Because once you get away from that, you're losing the communication process. You're losing every bit of information you need to gather to make that conversation successful. So in person, you see the person's face, so you can see what's happening. Are they upset, or are they looking at you or not looking at you? You can hear their words, but you could hear their tone. So tone's important. And in email, I don't know your
Yeah.
tone. I can't hear you. So I don't know if you're really angry, if you're being sarcastic, if you just are being direct. So when you are having difficult conversations, you really need to have those in person, or at least on a Zoom, to see the person if you can't physically be there. But that is critical. It's critical to the relationship building, and it's crucial to the outcome of the conversation.
Thank you. And I just want to add on to that. I know some people try to supplement for what you're saying will be missing by putting emojis, but I don't think we can do that in a real conversation. When I hear some people say that they express their emotions in professional emails using emojis. And I just want to add on to what you said and suggest that we don't do that.
No, I would fully agree not to use emojis. And frankly, maybe it's a generational thing, but I know the basic emojis, but there's some emojis there. I'm looking at them. I don't even know what they are. Like,
Yeah.
I'm looking at this emoji. I don't know what it is. So there can be miscommunication if you use an emoji and the recipient doesn't know what that means. That can make it worse.
It's a whole other complex issue.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
George, anything you want to add?
Yeah, so something I want to go back to is why people avoid having these critical, difficult conversations. And Gail, I think you're right. There's emotions and consequences involved. But I think what I've noticed is oftentimes the way people avoid the conversations ends up being toxic in some way to the relationship and
Good point.
and to the benefit of the business. So, and I think one way that people can avoid having that conversation, and I'm glad you brought it up, Mo, is, well, let me put it in an email. And that ends up being a whole nother thing that blows up in your face. You don't have that opportunity to have that, that real honest feedback, look somebody eye to eye if you can. If you can't do that, Zoom, phone call, at least you can get the voice in there. But, somehow I feel like, the way that you avoid the conversation ends up making it far worse. The issue can fester, or if you do something odd, like send an email, like to break up with your girlfriend. I mean, that is just so bad.
Yeah. Absolutely. And
Good example.
What I would add to that is absolutely have the conversation in person, but you can always follow up with an email, because once you've had the conversation, I've heard your tone, we understand each other. And then if I follow up in an email with maybe the next steps, because coming out of that, whatever it might be, there are some next steps, or maybe it's just an email saying, George, I want to thank you for meeting with me. I'm so glad we had an opportunity to discuss the situation. I feel much better about it. I hope you're feeling better about it. And that could be done in email. And that just solidifies that relationship even more as you move forward.
So like ending it with that positive note in an email.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. All right. What's the next point you want to go into, Gail? So let's keep continuing that story.
Sure.
This is a great start. So I know one of the points you mentioned when we were prepping for this was, how do you ensure that people feel like they have been treated fairly?
Definitely.
And I'm just thinking,
what I say to that is treat them fairly. So this idea is, how do you make sure? Well, you check the situation, be it whatever's going on in the business. Is the company treating them fairly? Have you been treating them fairly? You didn't mean to treat them unfairly, but really assess the situation like a SWOT analysis, right? Before you walk in, what is really going on that precipitated this particular conversation that you have to have, and make sure that the person is being treated fairly. And then going back to the EQ is when you're listening to them, acknowledge their feelings, acknowledge what they're saying with their eyes, with their words, and they will feel then that you're giving them that platform, that time. And not only will they feel heard, but that you're treating them fairly. So just assess the situation before you go in, do a little objective looking at whatever caused the reason why you're having that conversation, to make sure that the person is being treated fairly.
Do you know what this makes me think about, George? Thank you, Gail. Last week when we were talking about delegation, the toxic environment for delegation, I think this fits in really well, right? Part of when you were talking about, you brought up a really good point, talking about don't punish someone by delegating to them, right? That fairness. I think this kind of like fits into that perfect package, that you're treating them fairly with what you say, with what you give them to them to do, and so on. So that's a really good point, Gail. I'm glad you mentioned that one up, and it keeps going back. Emotional intelligence, I agree with you 1,000,000% that matters.
Yeah, I think it also comes into building trust, right? If somebody feels like that they're wronged, at some point you're kind of destroying the trust, and you start building a chasm between you and that person. And how do you build a bridge between that afterwards, right? Yeah. And something that I've noticed, quite frankly, Gail, and I don't know if you want to comment on this, but oftentimes the way you feel about somebody, like let's say, the same exact words from somebody that you trust can be taken so nice versus, somebody that you distrust or you don't have the rapport, the same exact words can just feel so hurtful. Like if somebody comments on you, well, that's a nice handbag. If it's somebody you like, you feel like you have a nice handbag. And if it's somebody that you don't like, you're thinking, what's wrong with my handbag?
Exactly. Well, and that's to your point. That's why it's so important to have these conversations in person, so you can continue to build a relationship, so you can understand the person's tone when they say something moving forward. And unfortunately, I think coming off of COVID, we've not been in person so much. So we've lost a lot of time in spending time in this rich medium with people to get to know what they mean when they say something, right? The tone and all of that stuff with relationship. And going back to how people view difficult conversations, that's an opportunity to build a relationship. So another way to look at having this conversation is you need to have it in order to continue to build relationships with the people you work with so that you can work better together in the future. And the only way you're going to get there is if you spend time having these conversations with the people you work with.
Nice. Very good. Thank you, Gail. And I think I'm checking the time. I think we have time for one more point. What do you guys think? Shall we go into the next point, Gail? How do we ensure that that person understands our perspective?
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to say be kind, because we all want to be kind, but be clear. A lot of times people are so uncomfortable to have these conversations, they dance around it, or they say the nice things. But what happens is we are attuned to listening to nice things. I mean, if you're going to say something nice about me, that's what I'm going to hear. But giving the feedback, or giving the, I don't want to use the word negative, but giving the tough feedback that you have to give, you've got to use precise language. So you're going to be kind when you say it, but you're not going to use words like that are ambiguous, right? So instead of saying, well, you always do this, or, when this happened, it went off the rails, the meeting went off the rails. Instead say, when X happened, that means that caused Y. So very specific cause and effect, so that people understand what really truly happened. Got to use that precise language. And then I would always say, role play with someone you work with. Mo, you and I work together.
Yeah.
I would gladly come in your office and want to come in your office to say, I'm about to have a conversation with someone that we both know at work. Here's what I'm going to say. What do you think, based on what you know about me and what you know about the other person? Because you might say, you know what, Gail, maybe with this person you want to, start this way, or make sure you mention this, because we know the people at hand in the conversation. So if you're lucky enough to have that trusted partner, then definitely rely on that person to role play, to talk about the conversation within reason, if it's not proprietary.
Something that I want to bring up is this trusted partner, something that they have to be very careful about.
Yeah.
Right. Because you also don't want to be gossiping, for instance. Right. And that's a danger. But I think the role play and rehearsing, and I've actually role played and rehearsed with people outside of the company. Like, for instance, Mo, there's times when I've had to have difficult conversations with folks at work, and I'll say, hey, Mo, let me run this by you. Here's the situation.
Yeah.
This is what I want to say. How would you take it? What do you feel?
Yeah.
And I think doing that works. And if you can't do that, I've actually, at times where it's critical, I've tried to rehearse in my head and then try to put myself in their shoes before the conversation. I'm a big fan of rehearsal and trying to practice before getting into that hard conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, George, to your point, definitely good point about certainly not, for, like I said, from a proprietary reason or with office politics and everything. You certainly don't want to talk about someone, in a bad light or something. So yeah, if you have that trusted partner outside of work, oh, that's even better, who even understands the general industry you're in or the players in the industry. That's very helpful.
And I think what I get out of what you both just said in the past couple of minutes is that it's not easy. It's not something that people should take for granted. They really should practice it and put the effort into mastering that art of conversing and relaying messages when they're talking. Wow, Gail, this was really interesting. And I really think, we would love to have you back to continue this conversation. We could keep talking about this for years. There's so much related to communication and the traps that people fall in. So thank you again. And I think we will probably move into communication. What do you think, George? Shall we kind of shift gears into communication next episode and talk about that, continue our discussion with Gail?
Sounds good.
Great.
Thank you so much. This was fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Sure.
It's been fantastic. So we'll wrap it up, Mo.
Yeah, sure. Thank you again, everyone, for listening. Thank you all for joining in and listening to this episode of Back to Basics on the Business Edge, brought to you by Feliciano School of Business at Montclair State University. We hope you all enjoyed this podcast and the information that we shared and the insight that Gail shared with us. And as always, we welcome any feedback that you have for us, including suggestions for future topics.
Thank you, and see you next time.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.